Hey, today my guest is Jeremy Hurewitz, and this is a very unusual episode for us, and unusual in the best possible way. And on the show, as you know, we talk to top realtors, we ask them how they grew their business, and they share those secrets with us. And today we have a very special guest, we're very excited to speak to Jeremy. And let me tell you more about him so you can get excited as well. So Jeremy Hurwitz started his career overseas as a freelance journalist for a decade, based out of Prague and out of Shanghai. And during that time, he built and ran the International Newspaper Association called Project Syndicate. Now, after returning to his native New York, Jeremy joined the world of corporate security. An influential but little known industry, Jeremy works with intelligence officers and other former government officials across a wide range of services, including kidnap for ransom consulting, background investigations, executive protection, and many other sensitive assignments. Jeremy is the author of the book Sell Like a Spy, which brings spy tradecraft to business and everyday communication. Jeremy writes regularly on foreign policy for a wide range of publications and is a policy advisor on national security for the Joseph Rainey Center. He's a strategic advisor to the corporate intelligence firm Interfor International, and he's also head of the Interfor Academy. I want you to learn all about Jeremy two places. I want you to go to his website, selllikeaspy.net, and also purchase his book, which you can find anywhere books are sold. Amazon, we will have the link to that. The book is called Sell Like a Spy. And Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to chat with you. So tell us, how did you get into this world, coming from being a writer?
Yeah, well, still a writer, and it just kind of morphed in various ways. Went overseas to Europe with a backpack and a guitar right after college, with a little wanderlust, and I found I was an English major, and I found the world of journalism, which was great. And I came over that decade abroad to cover mainly foreign policy in the intelligence world. Moving back to New York, or as you noted, I was ready to kind of get out of the media world and wanted to see where that skill set would translate. And I found this really interesting world of corporate security, corporate intelligence, corporate espionage. And I describe that these days as the biggest industry that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
It quietly influences the scene of foreign policy and business from behind the scenes, impacting huge decisions and legislation. I can point to examples, but most people don't know a lot about it because it lurks in the shadows. Most of the people who work in it are discreet former government officials. But I'm trying to shed a little bit more light on it because I think it's a fascinating world. And to your question, I started working in this world, and I started working directly with former CIA case officers in particular, but as well as FBI hostage negotiators, members of the special forces community, Secret Service, law enforcement, etc. But it was the case officers that really made an impact on me as we went to see clients and worked on sensitive investigations. Their ability to be kind of intellectually omnivorous and talk to and charm just about anybody,
Yeah.
how great they were at listening, and all these other skills. So I started thinking a lot about that over the years. And, to wrap it up, during COVID, I'm one of those people that said, you know what, never going back to an office full time again, ready to kind of, write books and kind of, I'm an advisor to a corporate intelligence firm, as you noted, but I also run my own little consulting business and write, and decided to finally write Sell Like a Spy. And pleased to share that yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the book's release.
Congratulations. I am super excited to read it myself. I picked up something from just learning about the book that I wanted to share with the audience, which is that you state that, sort of throw out everything we think we know about espionage because of, television, movies, and some of that is, fun and exciting and to watch. But what ultimately you said the skill set is around these people that play in that space is a salesmanship. This ability to persuade, to be communicative, to get what they need, to meet others' needs. And really, they have to have master skills in this department, which
Right.
of course makes perfect sense. So let's go into that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the communication skills that somebody who is in espionage, learns and develops.
Yeah, I was reflecting a little bit on this yesterday, the journey, because of that anniversary. And the person who wrote the forward to the book is a guy I knew a little bit because of this, the work I do, named Bob Grenier. And he had an amazing career. He was the station chief in Islamabad, Pakistan, when 9/11 happened. And he recounts the next day. No, a few days later, he was the first American official to meet with the Taliban after that. And he, as we describe in the forward, almost made a sale that changed the nature of the world. He convinced a senior Taliban official to buy into what he was selling, which was essentially the betrayal of the Al Qaeda and the rest of the Taliban. But that deal went south, as I'm sure you and your listeners know very well can happen. But when I went to Bob and said, "Hey, I have this idea," and he immediately grasped it, and that made such a big difference, because when you have somebody who's such a veteran of espionage like that say, "You're right," and what I say is that, and what he instinctively grasped and agreed with, is that spies are the world's best salespeople,
Yeah.
because there is no harder sale to make
Yeah.
than convincing someone to buy
It's
into
a pretty
treason,
good one.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly, and every case officer I have spoken with, bar none, has completely agreed that there is a strong corollary between sales and espionage. And as you noted, any talk or training I do, I typically have to kind of level set, because people think spies are, seducing people, engaged in car chases and gunfights, and that really happens very little. I mean, American case officers can't be involved romantically with their targets, so that doesn't happen.
Sure. Sure. That'd
They're
be a huge
polygraphed.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to point it out, because some certain unscrupulous overseas agencies engage in blackmail, seduction, which is called honey traps, all of that. But the U.S. intelligence community tries to operate with higher ethical standards. And
Sure.
I actually talk a lot about that ethics. But that is really at heart what they are good at. They are relationship managers. They are incredibly good at growing relationships and getting people to believe in them. And they also work with people, as a final point here, that are not easy to befriend. They don't,
Sure.
you guys think in the real estate world that you might have some tough clients. Well, think about case officers trying to sell what they're selling to, terrorists, criminals, diplomats
Yeah.
from places like North Korea, Iran, some tough places. So there's so much we can do to learn from these people. And I have such enormous respect for case officers. I want to show people who they really are and how good they are at what they do.
How much of being a somebody that is effective in espionage, how much of it is learning how to accept the worldview or the reality of the subject? In other words, how to step into what they how they interact with the world, their beliefs, their thoughts, their feelings. Is it usually that sort of process where you are trying to appear that you are similar to them, or are you coming at it with I'm different from you and I'm going to try to win you over? Just out of curiosity, what's the play there usually?
Yeah, I mean, spies aren't trying to change somebody's mind. They're trying to find, and they're so good at understanding people's motivation. So spies, a lot of work has usually been done before they approach an agent, but they'll, find out that someone from a, third world country has a sick child that can't get the care they need, and you can get it in the U.S. Or, money is a big thing, or grievance because they're an ethnic group that's been passed up. So they know how to do that. And I think that is a blind spot in many of the relationship development fields in the corporate world. We think I'm a charming person, I have a great product
Sure.
or service, they should buy from me. So motivation is key. In terms of, convincing somebody, I would talk about what I call radical empathy, and then briefly on mirroring. Radical empathy is the idea that, I like to say, and this is just, something I pull out, that 99% of humanity has some redeeming kernel of humanity that if we work hard enough, we can uncover.
Yeah.
I like to refer to a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I'm not certain that he said this, but supposedly he said, "I don't like that person. I must get to know him better." So
Yeah.
a lot of the skills that I talk about and the skills that spies engage in are about uncovering that side of humanity. And there's a quote I like that I write about in the book that a case officer I worked with, who I couldn't name, said, "Every good intelligence officer has a real bond with their target on some level and in
Sure.
some regard." So these are very real relationships that they form, even with some very odious people. So they use radical empathy to work really hard at that as a conduit. And then, you alluded to something about kind of winning them over, making them feel comfortable. Mirroring does that. And mirroring, a lot of people know about, is the physical replication of another person's body language.
Sure.
I like to say that I give people the kind of varsity move to layer on top of that, which is verbal mirroring. And we can go into that a little bit more if you want to. But those are very powerful ways, using behavioral science, using how we're hardwired in our evolution to get to know people, to build rapport, to shortcut that process, because we are wired. When we see somebody or hear somebody behaving like us, it gives us comfort. And we as human beings seek comfort. And that's partially why, we can go down a rabbit hole with this, why hiring practices, whatever you feel about diversity, we tend to hire people who look like us, sound like us, make us comfortable. So a lot of the work I do involves leveraging behavioral science, and that's what spies do too. They leverage the ways we behave to get us to do certain things.
So yeah, Dale Carnegie wrote about this in How to Win Friends and Influence
Sure.
People. Basically said, ask a lot of questions about people and they'll feel like they like you. Which is essentially, the message of the book, which is to say that people want to talk about themselves. They want to feel heard and understood. They want to be seen by other humans. They want to feel connected. And so this is very sort of obvious when you think about it. However, it does sort of not always be seen as such a it's not always so obvious that we need to approach a conversation from the perspective of, how does the other person like to be communicated? How does the other person, what's their worldview? How do they talk? How do they move? What is their cadence? What are their mannerisms? And how do I adjust my behavior to not become inauthentic, but how do I match their customs so that they feel more comfortable? And I imagine that's a good chunk of what you teach.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot of great stuff there. It sounds like you already read my book. So, it's great that you've done your homework there without fully reading it yet. I love what you said about matching the other side. If you can match their tone of voice, their body language, you're ahead of the game. But, people try too hard sometimes too. And especially with mirroring, I like to tell people, practice it with friends and family, because that's the easiest one to get wrong. If you do it wrong, it's going to look like you're mocking someone or copying them. So start subtle. Don't lose yourself in the process. Keep it simple. But you're absolutely right. We have mirror neurons in our brain that get fired up when we see somebody behaving like us. And when, the verbal mirroring is so important, the work I've done with FBI hostage negotiators, in this niche world of kidnap for ransom negotiation, is pretty fascinating. And, FBI hostage negotiators can't be physically mirroring the person they're trying to, win over. So they have to use some of the same language. And that gets into using even specifically colloquialisms, pet phrases. We all have these little words that we enjoy using. I have a friend that says 100% for yes every time, and another that says, by the way, as a verbal crutch. Look for those things in conversation. Use them subtly here and there, and it will signal to the other side, hey, this person is on my side. They bring me comfort. They won't even know that they're being influenced in that way. But if you leverage that verbal mirroring on top of kind of sitting with a similar posture to them, smiling if they're smiling, looking serious and concerned if they are too, it will really work to shortcut the rapport building process.
Yeah, let's give a few other examples. So somebody walks into a listing presentation. Maybe they haven't met the potential client. They sit down, and it's a cold open. There's a little bit of nervous energy, I'm sure. And what do you start to look for right away as the salesperson, or in this case, realtor, to begin to, we always think about what are we going to say, but what could we start to look for to start matching? What are some suggestions you would have?
So in this scenario, is this like a group that's
I
being
would say,
presented to
let's
you, or
say it's a
just
one-on-one.
one-on-one, or? Yeah. Well, one of the things you want to look for, and I teach extensively, is body language. So, if you're talking to somebody and you're, I hope I can do an adequate job of describing this in your world, but say the list price comes up and all of a sudden they reach back and start rubbing the back of their neck. Well, I like to say that in body language, just like in detecting deception, no one thing always means the other thing. So for instance, reaching back and rubbing your neck is known as a
Yeah, a
comfort
soothing
gesture,
technique.
right?
Yeah.
So a soothing, technique, exactly. And what I talk about is developing a mosaic of intelligence so that you don't lean too heavily on one bit. That's how case officers, that's how the intelligence community works, right? And so if I mention the list price and I see the other side start to rub the back of their neck or lick their lips or start rubbing their legs, they engage in a soothing gesture. I'm not going to say, oh, wow, but I just blew them out of the water on pricing. I'm going to say, they might be uncomfortable with pricing. I'm going to need to
Interesting.
circle back on this and figure out, I'm going to need to think about that. If I mention something about, I don't know, escrow or any other aspect of it, and they start to fold their arms, that's known as a
Yeah.
blocking gesture. But it could also mean that they're just comfortable folding their arms. So you don't want to put too much weight on it. But if they put a water bottle in front of them, if they put their handbag on the table, anything someone puts between you and them is a blocking gesture. Just as when they hold the crown of their nose and squeeze their eyes shut, they don't want to hear the
Right.
information coming to them. So there's a lot that people can pick up in my book about reading body language to understand how the message that you're sending is being received by the other side. But of course, in this discussion, as you're sharing details about the listing and all of that, I think you really want to get quickly to the other side and say, what are your priorities? What are your concerns financially about the neighborhood? What's important to you? You guys know how to do your job specifically. Ask those questions and then carefully listen and start to engage in some of that mirroring behavior. So those are things that can really put you on a good track to making that person comfortable, and trying to win them over. And we can dig in on active listening and why it's so hard too, but everything flows
Active
from
listening
active
is so
listening.
powerful. If for
Mhm.
those of us who have learned about relationship building, especially our primary romantic relationships, you probably come across the Gottman Institute, and the Gottmans are very they're scientists as well, and they do a whole lot about active listening, and they have the data to show that for conflict resolution, it's very very interesting. And my partner, my girlfriend, and I, we practice this. So when we are in conflict, which it happens, she will we have
Of
a
course.
space where we can bring that up, or she'd say, hey, you did this thing and it made me feel crummy, and in the future I'd rather you do it a different way. So we have a little bit of a language where she's not saying you're a jerk, but she's able to state, you hurt me with this thing hurt. And instead of me getting defensive and saying, no, you don't understand, I wasn't doing that, I didn't mean to, it wasn't my intention, or trying to defend it like, well, you do this, and instead of that, which doesn't help. What does help is to, again, as to your point, mirror and reflect back that person's reality, validate their reality. So in that to that point, I would then say, I would literally mirror back what she said. If I heard you correctly, you said when I did this, it made you feel this way, and in the future, you would like me to do this instead. Do I have that correct? And then she can adjust it and say, well, you got it right, but maybe And it's amazing. It sounds so simple and kind of silly and rudimentary. However, what it does is it makes the other person feel like, oh my God, they understand me, they get it. And it takes away my defensiveness as well, because now I don't have to try to tell her I'm not a bad guy. You didn't, And so a lot of this, I'm sure, shows up in the world of persuasion. And so I think this is a great thing. You said, you ask a lot of questions, you repeat them back. Do I have this correct? Is this what you're looking for? I want to make sure I've got it. And people love it when they get their own thoughts and feelings validated.
Yeah, I mean, those we're talking about active listening, but you're also diving into another area, essentially diffusing emotional encounters, which we can talk about. And I do want to say that I know that
Sure.
technique you're describing, kind of reiterating the side of the other side, the views of the other side, if you will, is popular and works for some people. It's not what I specifically teach. The verbal mirroring that I engage in
Sure.
is a little bit more subtle. I know people like to say, in summary, I heard you say the following. I'm mixed on that, and we can go into that, but I understand that that can work for people. But you're absolutely right that engaging in very clear listening of the other side is really important. And again, when we getting into diffusing emotional encounters, one of the first thing I tell people, if someone storms into your office, DJ, and is upset about something, even if you're busy, if you value that person, the first thing you want to do and what you're doing there
Yes.
is let that person vent.
Yep.
Let that person get everything off their chest. And a lot of times with a client, and I've been that client in real estate where you're upset about the negotiation or something, that you might be listening to your
Sure.
client and they
Of
have it
course.
wrong, and they're wrong on several levels. I'm sure that you deal with that all the time, but you don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to correct them. You want to let them fully unburden themselves. You want, if they walk into your office and they're standing and you're seated, invite them to sit down. If they won't sit, don't stand up. It'll raise the temperature. And then there's a variety of other things. I could go on, but there's, inviting them to contribute to the solution, asking them what they think should be done, and that often leads to a very emotional and extreme statement. And a lot of times, when people say something that's very extreme, they get deflated. Once they've said
There's a
something out loud
release.
that is just completely ridiculous. Exactly. So your girlfriend DJ might say to you, "I never want you
Yeah.
to see that person again," or something, and then you just sit and let it sit there for a moment, and they might say, "Oh, you know what, I understand that's not totally reasonable, but can you
Sure.
respect this boundary or something?" So those are just a couple thoughts on diffusing emotional encounters. We can talk more about active
Yeah,
listening
so
too
it
if you'd
sounds
like.
like the objective when we're thinking about how we want to communicate with a potential client is connection. We want them to feel connected to us. And I'm assuming that's the primary objective. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we want them to feel comfortable with us. People want to do business with those that they like. What I tell people is, like, unless your product or service is totally differentiated or you have a price point that
Right.
blows someone out of the water, it's salesmanship, it's relationships that make a difference. Let's face it, in real estate, you're selling something. You're not
Right.
in charge of the price or a lot of the details, right? You're facilitating. So really, what's the difference between you and another realtor that could come in? It's who you are and how you will make them feel about this process. That's why real estate has been an area that has really gravitated towards what I'm talking about here, because it's not about closing that deal. It's about the relationships that will lead to
Well,
the
tell
deal
us about
closing.
the book. What can somebody expect to learn from reading Sell Like a Spy?
Well, it's a handbook on communications. Yeah, it's certainly like a bit of a memoir of kind of a different kind of life and career that I've led. So there's that aspect of it, but it's a handbook on communications, not unlike the famous Dale Carnegie book. That at the end of every chapter there are takeaway sections that you can refer to and come back to. But I think it also inspires people to kind of get outside the box when they're thinking. Who doesn't like to think like a spy or an FBI hostage negotiator or a general? And you can use some of the same skills that they use as you're working on getting to know somebody or dealing with your pain in the butt mother-in-law or something like that. These are real skills that really work to build rapport, to overcome challenging encounters with people, to negotiate, to create ethical frameworks. So I believe it's a deeply utilitarian and useful guide for people to think differently about growing relationships and communicating on
Yeah,
teams.
and I remember learning many decades ago that the verbal part of communication only accounts for about 12% or so of the entire communication. The rest of it is nonverbal. So we were talking about the vast majority of communication is not what you say. And so you dive into that a lot
Yeah.
in the book, specifically around body movement, posture, the way in which somebody moves. And this is something that most humans just don't think about when they're in communication with others. They're focused on what they want to say next, and there is a skill development here that will take time, to where you can do both, where you can think about what you want to say next, and at the same time learn to adjust your mannerisms to match the other person's reality, so that they feel like, wow, this person's just like me.
Yeah, now we're really into the active listening thing. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that 12% number. There's a controversial ratio that I write about in the book that, some say up to 90% of our communication is about body language and tone of voice, and only
Yeah.
10% is about the words. That varies depending on, who you talk to. To me, I believe it varies based on who you are, who you're talking to, and things like the time of day, what the subject matter is, where you're speaking. All of these things will influence that ratio. But the bottom line is, across the board, people agree that a large majority of our ability to listen and communicate comes from, nonverbal things. And I like to use an analogy. I'm a big music guy, and let's say you have a favorite pop song, but you might only know the chorus or some of the lyrics. And conversations like that too. Melody is body language and tone of voice, and the words are the lyrics. And you don't need all the words of the lyrics to get the emotional context and meaning of the song or the conversation. But that's why active listening can be such a challenge, because you're taking in so much. And the best example of that too is why people struggle with names. Doing the work I do, I roll my eyes when I hear someone say, "Oh, I'm so bad with names."
Yeah.
We're all bad with names, okay? If you're good with names, you are a rare, rare person. When we meet somebody, we are taking in everything but their name. We're looking at their body language, their tone of voice, and we're saying to ourselves, is this person a friend or a foe? Are they a potential love interest? Where do they fit on my social or business hierarchy? And the name is superfluous to our kind of atavistic brain. So we need to really work hard at growing an active listening practice, to committing to it and trying to grow it over time, because there is no trick I can teach anybody about how to be a great active listener. But as a final point, I usually start off the section when I'm training or giving a talk about active listening, that component, by asking whoever's in the audience, think about the best listener you've ever experienced in your life. And I pause for a minute and I say, I'm sure you have a very high opinion of that person, right? Because as you noted earlier, I thought you said it well, that, when we feel listened to, we feel seen, respected, understood. And who doesn't want that? Certainly for your clients, but also for your friends and family. Who doesn't want to be known as someone who
Yeah.
treats people that way? So it's worth investing in, and everything again that I talk about flows from
In
that
your
ability.
experience with people in the espionage world, I'm curious about this one question, and I don't know that there's a specific answer to it, but I'd love to hear your perspective, which is to say, and we think about this on in salesmanship, is do you ask for the sale? Do you ask the person to sign on the dotted line? I'd like you to become my client, or I'd like you to do this thing in espionage. Maybe I'd like you to, sign this agreement or do this, task that is against your, at the beginning of the conversation, maybe against what you would want to do. So, or do you subtly influence them over time so that they come to their own conclusion and make the decision themselves? I'm curious what the best negotiators and the best communicators you found do.
Well, it's a really good question. And I actually, yesterday on the anniversary of my book release, had lunch with a former case officer had non-official cover, which is quite interesting. And I write about it in my book. And he referred to that, about how, long, sometimes agent recruitment takes quite a while. And a lot of times a very significant relationship built on trust happens. And when they have to make that sale and say, hey, here's who I really am, that could be the most fraught part of the conversation. But at that point, that person might already have been receiving a consulting fee. They might already be deeply intertwined with this person, and that influences, how they think about it. You do have to have the chutzpah, we could say, to actually say, hey, here's what we need to do. If you're enjoying working with me, I need your, to sign here, and I'm going to be your person to make your dream come true about your home or whatever it is you're doing. And spies have to do the same thing for the most part, but a lot, because there are what's known as unwitting agents. In the work that I do currently as a corporate spy, if you might say, I do what's called a human intelligence collection on background investigations, for instance, on other cases too. And these people don't really become my agent, but I call them and I ask them a variety of questions. And I use tradecraft there because I use what I call the violin conversation, which is about the fact that people tend to remember the beginning and end of a conversation and not the middle so much. So there's tradecraft in there. I might have really one question I want to ask that person, but I'll frame it in a context of 3, 4, 5 and put that difficult one in the middle. So it's really about how you deliver some of these things. And they're kind of an unwitting agent. I haven't asked them if they're willing to be like an intel agent for me. They just answer some things for me. So it varies. I hope that's not a
No,
dodge, but
and again,
I
there's
hope that
no
was
one
okay.
way. I
Yeah.
remember met a financial advisor many years ago. He was really successful, and I asked him that question: do you ask for somebody to give you 100% of their investable assets, to sign. And he goes, you don't have to if you present yourself correctly, they're going to want to sign up. And again, that's not
Yeah.
of course, end all be all for every person. Some people do need to be asked. And but I just was curious on, the idea is that, I guess, building rapport, making the other person feel seen, heard, appreciated, and acknowledged is probably makes, if you do need to ask, a heck of a lot easier.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an anecdote in my book about a case officer who was recruiting a diplomat from. He wouldn't tell me. I think it was Iran, and they were in Europe, and they spent a lot of time together. And eventually, that individual confided in him that he was an atheist and
Yeah,
he didn't believe in God. And not only could he lose his job, he would lose
sure.
his social status. He would lose his, a lot of things. And so to share that with
That's
somebody,
very vulnerable.
that it's very vulnerable. And then, for him to reveal the other side, that he was in the CIA, the guy probably a lot of times, and I've heard this, kind of get it at that point, maybe pick up on it already. They realize you're not State Department. You're meeting them at unlikely hours. Why are you interested in them? But when you've developed that rapport already, and when you're, speaking to their grievance, or when you're sort of talking about their sick child, people are smart and they start to put some things together. And it's not as shocking as you might think for them to make the reveal that, hey, I can get your child that care. I can help bail you out of financial distress. Whatever the case may be, I can help you. By the way, you already like me. You trust me. You've told me something incredibly fraught about yourself. So this is the way the human mind works. We crave relationships. We crave understanding, and we'll do extraordinary things for people
So I
that
guess
bring that to us.
step one is building rapport and matching and mirroring and making the other person feel as if you are like them, you're similar to them. And then it's about extracting their deepest desire for the particular event that you're working on, right? So it's, as you were saying, could be it could be anything, but whatever their goal is, and then you help them achieve that goal. I'm guessing is you are there to communicate, I can help you get that. uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so powerful with real estate, right? I mean, this is the biggest
yeah.
investment people make in their entire lives. I'm a homeowner myself. So you want your agent to be somebody that you feel is really in your corner, that gets you, that feels comfortable with the other side. So that's why I think real estate individuals have gravitated
and,
towards
and, and
selling
also
online.
to understanding in the home buying process in particular and the home selling process, the fear that comes up that doesn't always show up in a one-on-one meeting between a realtor and a client, right? People are putting on oftentimes their bravest faces. Certainly the client is maybe going to share any anxieties they might have, but maybe not. Maybe they'll suffer silently after you leave and go, oh my God, am I making this horrible decision about buying or selling? What advice do you
Right.
have for agents to acknowledge, or maybe not acknowledge? What do you do with that so that the other person isn't suffering alone?
I mean, I think if you have a sense that that's going on, you can. It might make sense to go directly at it. It might make sense to use what I call the skill of elicitation, which we can talk about, which is a more subtle way to extract information that oftentimes doesn't use a question, or oftentimes uses a bank shot question to get at the real question, and again leverages behavioral science. So that would come to mind as the best way to learn about that, because if there is anxiety, you want to obviously soothe that. You can't be a mind reader. So if you have a sense of something, I would point to the area of elicitation in my book, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how that
Ye-
works and how
Yeah,
it can be
let's dive.
effective.
Let's dive a little bit into that, because elicitation, I think, is really important, because we're constantly thinking about presentation, right? As the sales
Right.
agent, as the salesperson, as the realtor, we're like, what do I need to say next? What do I need to do next? How do I need to tell this person why I'm so great and why I'm the man or the woman for the job? And how much of it is about eliciting sort of the other person's needs and figuring that out?
I think that's another area why these skills work so well in real estate. Because if you're showing a house to a young couple, you don't know that couple yet. You don't know if they want to have kids or don't want to have kids. Maybe they haven't been able to have kids, and it's a sore spot. So if you're showing them a house with multiple bedrooms, and you can say, this could be if you said just directly, this could be a great, room for a kid, that
Sure.
might hit the wrong note with those people, So, trying to elicit whether they're, trying for a baby or not, through a variety of means could be something that is
Like,
helpful
for
as you're
example,
doing
if
so.
if they
You
were
know,
looking for a 3 bedroom and they were a married couple without children, one might ask, "Hey, that's great. What might you do with those other 2 bedrooms?"
well, that's a
Oh,
very
there's more subtle
direct way
ways.
to ask it. My Absolutely, more subtle ways. You might say, this. I've seen people turn rooms like this into a separate den or a music studio or a study, and because again, you alluded to this earlier, people are vain. They want you to know about themselves. So I would reckon that most of the time your client is going to say, "Oh no, we're looking forward to having 2 kids. That's a big thing for us." Or, "Oh yeah, I'm a musician and I want to, or I'm a painter and I want to make this into a studio." And my wife's going to turn that into an office. People will want to tell you what they want to do, especially as your broker, so that you can help them. And I would argue that asking a question directly puts them on the spot and could
Oh,
create an
good point.
awkward
Good
encounter.
point.
So instead, yeah, using elicitation to let them direct the way forward is how to use this technique, which is a more subtle way to collect intelligence. And just very briefly in the book, I talk about what I dubbed the small town exercise, which is a training exercise that the CIA does with its recruits. They take them to a little seaside village on the coast of Virginia, and the assignment is go up to somebody on the street, learn as much as you can from them, but don't
Ah,
ask any questions. So that trains case officers. So my example of how that works is you go up to somebody, and I always say it's an unseasonably warm day early in the summer. And I say, I'm from New York, but I would say something like, "Oh, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. This is such a sweltering day. I'm just
yeah,
dying here today." No question. The others, people tend to respond to
yeah.
things in kind. That person will likely say something like, "Oh, I grew up in South Florida. It's this hot or hotter for most of the year, so I'm not bothered." Well, you didn't ask any question there. You just shared something about yourself, and they responded and told you something about themselves. So if you're a broker and you're like, "I have a 3 bedroom home. My wife and I, we have just 2 dogs. That room
Yeah.
is used as my office, and it's so great to have the flexibility." The other side is likely going to say what they might want to do with
Yeah,
those
it's so
bedrooms.
interesting that you're talking about this. Is it's almost like by revealing something about yourself. So we think a lot about questions, as the questions are the way. Another way to go is to reveal something about yourself, because what that does is it opens up a space for the other person to then share what they might do with that revelation that you've given them. Is like, "Oh, I would do this with that," and then they might think,
Totally.
"Well, I would do this other thing with that." So it's really actually quite brilliant. It's you're sharing something, revealing something about yourself, and then they're going to want to think, "Well, what would I do?" And just in the sake of the conversation back and forth, they might say, "Well, I might want to do this," and that's really, really smart.
Exactly. And I'll give you one more powerful aspect of elicitation, which is arguably the most popular skill I teach. A lot of this is again based on human vanity. We're all the stars of our own little story, and there's no details too small about ourselves that we don't feel strongly compelled to correct. So the tendency to correct is known as a powerful trigger of elicitation. So I might say, "Hey DJ, your favorite color is blue, right?" And you'll say, "No, my favorite color is not blue, it's red." Almost all the
Right, I
time you
won't
will
say, "No,
correct the
you're wrong."
record
I
about
will say,
something
"You're
about
wrong.
yourself.
It's X instead." Ah,
Exactly. And I could see that being really useful in a real estate context, because you might say to somebody, correct me if I'm wrong. I meet with a million people a day, but didn't you tell me that you guys were looking for, a finished basement? And they might say, "No, I don't really care about a finished basement," or "Yes, definitely. And it has to have a bathroom already installed," or something. They will correct the record about it. If you, instead of asking them, "Do you need a finished basement," or something, it could be a more subtle way. Because I always say, and I think it's true in real estate, if you start peppering people with questions, they
yes.
feel interrogated, they feel defensive, they know you're selling. If you just sort of make statements that are open ended, they will correct the record, and it feels a little bit like
Oh,
more of a
that's
back
such
and
a
forth.
smart
And again,
idea.
that's how spies do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a smart
Yeah.
idea, because it's funny. You go to the doctor for the first time and you get that 200 questions in front of you, and it's not that it's you understand why you have to answer all those questions, but it's taxing, it's annoying. It's like, okay, I don't have any of these diseases, I haven't had these surgeries, but you understand why it's necessary. But it doesn't feel great to answer those 200 questions about, tell me of everything that ever happened to you in your previous health history. So you're kind of right that yes, you do ask some questions. Obviously, you're going to ask the person what they're looking for, what's important to them. But you can also make inferences, and then they will correct you. They will tell you, and then they are. Is there a risk that they feel that you weren't listening if you make an inference and it's incorrect? Because of course, that's a possibility.
Well, I mean, be a good listener, and the lessons. I have two lessons to share here. That number one, note taking is a
Yeah.
big part of what I talk about. The CIA prepares dossiers of information, so you should do your homework before you meet somebody, and then when you leave a client, I would encourage your audience to sit down and
Yeah.
immediately do a brain dump and note everything you possibly can about that. So that's I forgot the second point I wanted to make there about you were talking about
Well, just
inference or
wondering that if when you make an inference that the
oh
other person has to correct,
yes.
would they think like this guy's not listening? This guy heard something that didn't happen.
So So you want to take great notes to make sure you don't do that because you might think I'll remember all the details about this, but if you do five
Right.
showings a day, you're not necessarily or more, as I'm sure your audience does. That's going to be hard, So take extensive notes on people after you meet with them. But then what I also encourage people to do, and this is more with networking, but it certainly applies to your audience and the particularities of being a realtor. What I like to tell people is that you can judge a book by its cover. The old
Yeah.
cliche is wrong. Behavioral science has proved that we make snap judgments about people in a fraction of a second that
Yeah.
prove to be largely accurate. So, you don't want to make outlandish statements
Sure.
based on someone's appearance, but you do want to use what people are giving you. Every day when we exit our home and go out into the world, we are sending messages about who we are and how we want to be seen by the world. Our hairstyle, our facial hair, or lack thereof, jewelry, the clothing that we wear, how we carry ourselves are all full of messages and information about who we are and how we want to be treated. So, if your client shows up and they're wearing a Sturgill Simpson T-shirt, you can assume that they're a music fan and they like that guy, and you might relate to them with it. So you want to use what people are giving you, but don't make
Sure.
crass assumptions about people, but use
Well,
that information.
selllikeaspy.net is where you can learn about all of Jeremy's different services that he offers. He's a sales trainer, he is a coach, he is also a speaker. He trains organizations, he can train your sales team, he can train your realtors, and he speaks. You've spoken at Inman, you've spoken in the real estate community quite extensively, and these are really interesting and fun new skills that I think in the interpersonal world that we just don't always think about. We think about presentation so much. What do I say? What do I do? We don't necessarily think about how do I act? How do I respond to another person's reality? How do I enter their reality? I always heard that the best way to help a crazy person is not by telling them they're crazy, it is by acknowledging their reality is valid, because to them it is valid. So acknowledging someone else's objections and hearing them and making them feel appreciated, and then being able to, with that bond of trust, being able to then slowly persuade that person to what you believe is the best option for them. And I think that is what you teach. And you teach it at again at the highest level, because again, there's nothing more at stake, I can imagine, than in espionage when it comes to communication. Like that's the ultimate form of high stakes communication. There's lives on the line. There's national security at risk. There are, in some cases, hostages that need to be need to be protected. And so communication is everything. Persuasion is everything. And it's not so much about how do I trick this person. I imagine it's how do I calm this person? How do I get this person to see me as an advocate, or as a friend? And you're right. We all want to work with people that we know, like, and trust, and that takes skill. We have to demonstrate to people that we know, like, and that they could trust us. So sell like a spy is the website to go. Please purchase the book Sell Like a Spy. You can find it on Amazon, of course, everywhere else books are sold. Jeremy Hurewitz is our guest, and on behalf of our audience, I want to thank Jeremy for all of the great tips and skills that you shared with us today. I appreciate that. This is really been a fun episode for me, and I hope that our audience starts to think about not just what are we going to say and what are we going to do when we get in front of a client, but how are we going to respond to them? How are we going to meet their needs? How can we adjust ourselves to make them feel more comfortable? Because those are the best salespeople I've ever found. They're not the ones that have the best sales pitch. They're the ones that really make you feel seen and heard, and you're like, wow, that person gets me. And that's what Jeremy's book is going to teach you how to do. So Sell Like a Spy, where you go. On behalf of the audience, again, thank you, Jeremy. On behalf of Jeremy and myself, I want to thank the audience for sticking around to the end. We appreciate you. The best way that you can help us continue to make our show even bigger is by telling a friend. Think of another realtor that could benefit from hearing this great conversation we had with Jeremy, and pass them a link over to this. And also leave us a review. Let us know wherever you're listening or watching this. Let us know what you think of the show. Leave us some comments. We appreciate that. We take those comments very seriously and then continue to improve our show based on your recommendations. So I also thank you to our sponsors. And again, selllikeaspy.net is where you go. If you want to hire Jeremy as a coach, or you want him to train your organization, or want him to speak at an organization, reach out to him. His website, selllikeaspy.net, is where you can go to learn all about it. He is a master communicator and has worked at the highest level of government, really, with communication. So this is the man. So reach out to him and read the book, and I'm excited to read it as well. We will see everybody on the next episode. Thanks, Jeremy.